blame. Only 5% think unemployment is the problem. Two guests joining me now say there are other factors to play in here as well. Simeon Brown is a youth leader here in London, and Gavin Poole is the Executive Director of the Centre for Social Justice. Thank you both for joining us. Simeon, how would you explain what's going on in London, at least, which is the area that you know?
I think this is where I would differentiate some of the riots, because what we've seen is a mutation. In Tottenham, what we saw was a peaceful protest calling for accountability and transparency.
Tottenham's where it all started on Saturday night, right? In reaction to the death of a local man.
Exactly. And this was a part of a wider movement calling for police accountability and transparency due to a number of of deaths in police custody. And then what we saw was it escalate. And many young people who had that grievances that have developed over generations and that exist in the collective memory, suddenly looked at the police and removed their legitimacy, removed their consent to the police, I should say, and they stood up and they pretty much started a riot. And what we then saw was that it's escalated and mutated into many opportunists hijacking the situation.
Well, that's the point, isn't it? You're talking about escalating grievance, but actually the opportunism seems to be such a huge part of this, just wanton violence, attacking stores and nicking stuff. Are we complicating it too much by putting more into it and talking about these social problems in the background?
What I would say is that there is a context. Many of the people that we've seen take to the streets, they didn't just come from anywhere. They have existed on the fringes of our society for a long time. And in this space, they have their own hierarchy, their own norms, and they're pretty much way outside of the sphere that we are operating. And I think
society hasn't noticed.
What we're talking about is our divided society. Suddenly, the people in the periphery, who we didn't think much about, have exploded rather than imploded. And what we're dealing with now are the very, 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 very isolated and the marginalised. And we need to have a discourse and debate about citizenship, about social inclusion, and really about trying to bridge the divides in our nation.
Gavin, I know that you've pretty much warned that this was going to happen. You've been researching this for many years, of course, but a lot of people seem to just be saying that, you know, whatever the social reasons, this is just an attack and people are just attacking shops and just trying to make the most of the short term. This isn't a long-term problem, but you've warned before, so what's your perspective?
We have, and I think there's a couple of things to distinguish in the current situation. There's no doubt there's some opportunism going on, and there's some criminal behaviours which are people just actually joining in and helping themselves. I think one of the key issue, though, as quite rightly that Simeon's brought out, is there's a group, there's an element which are being marginalised and excluded from mainstream society. And what the work of the Centre for Social Justice has done...
But doesn't that excuse the violence?
No, this is not an excuse. What we've been saying over the last couple of days is, OK, let's deal with the issue now. Let's get control of that. Right, the dust will settle. Okay,
so clamp down hard and then address the issue?
Because the issue is going to take years to sort out. We've been sleepwalking into this for a number of years. The CSJ has been trying to highlight it now for 6 years since we published Breakthrough Britain. And what we're saying is social breakdown and brokenness is everywhere in the UK.
Social breakdown, what's that? Families?
OK, we've identified 5 key areas which lead to brokenness in society. The first one is the breakdown of the family. The second is education, lack of work and a lifetime on benefits, high levels of addiction and high levels of personal debt. And if you start building a picture where people have 3, 4, 5 of those in their life, they are down, they're at the bottom end of society, and they are never likely to come back up without any specific interventions like that Simeon's been talking about. What we would say is people need to look at this. It's not so much about financial reform, which this government is going on, which we endorse, but you need to do it in hand with a social reform. And what we've been saying is, let's strengthen families. Let's rebuild relationships. In the areas and the communities, a lot of these young people, it started up in Tottenham, have come from a society where there's lack of role models, there's lack of fathers. They're probably 3rd or 4th generation where the family is completely broken down. They have no idea what it's like to parent a child effectively. They've lost control of their children by the time that they're teenagers. So when we hear media commentators or adults on the street or the police saying, parents, get hold of your children, know where they are. Actually, these parents don't know where their children are, and sometimes they're not really interested to know where their children are, but they're out on the streets. And as Simeon has said, they've exploded out of the communities where we have conveniently parked them in social housing, where we've ghettoised these communities, and they've exploded into mainstream society.
Simeon, it sounds quite academic when Gavin talks about it like that, but the people that you deal with, a typical person, does that relate to that person that you deal with?
What I would What I would say is that I agree that there are certain communities, certain sections of the communities who are, I would say, they are very much in their own realm. They very much have their own space. They have their own rules, their own hierarchies, and they're away from the roots into education.
Because their parents are away and this amalgam
what
of
we've
problems?
seen is generations that are socially excluded. When I say socially excluded, what do I mean? We have a society where the root is you go to school. You go to school, you get your education. You either become a professional or you go into higher education. Therefore, you get a professional qualification, you get your mortgage. It's a specific route to the way that we work things. You might volunteer at your local church or you'll do things. They have their own sphere. They have either fell out of education, where therefore they can't go that route, or for various different reasons, they don't have those strengths. We've seen the family, we've seen the community, we've seen key institutions that support individuals to flourish and grow really break down in these spaces. And what we need to do is we need to begin to engage, mobilise and rebuild these spaces.
Simeon, Gavin, thank you both very much indeed, and we'll hear from David Cameron and the politicians in an emergency meeting in Parliament tomorrow. They're going to have to address it now.